Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dread Time Stories. I'm your host, Dr. Phobia. And tonight, dear patients, it's time for me to administer you another round of real horror stories. Tonight's tales all have a common theme. Scary things that have happened on the night shift. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, Truly Terrifying, Volume 13. Ooh, how unlucky. So this story comes from the dark ages, back in 2011. I was 21 years old at the time and was working at a gas station. I had expressed wanting to try to pick up more hours to make some extra money when the owner of the gas station gave me a better idea. He said, what if you could work the exact same number of hours, but make a little more money? I was definitely interested, and a little less so when he told me I would have to switch to third shift, because apparently there would be a 50-cent per hour differential. At first, I really wasn't super interested, but the thought of having more time during the day and making that extra money eventually brought me around to it. So this was week 3 of my night shift schedule when everything all went straight to hell. I was behind the counter, and it was about 4 in the morning. It had been completely dead up until this guy walks in. This guy was completely bald. And when I mean completely bald, he didn't even look like he had eyebrows. He just sort of walked into the store, headed straight back to where the energy drinks were, and the next thing I know, he just starts making this god-awful screaming sound and rips open the case with the energy drinks and starts throwing them all over the place, chucking them into other coolers and smashing the glass, throwing them even in my direction, others just straight up in the air while just wailing like he was being fed feet first into a wood chipper. I can tell you, I'm a lot less brazen in my old age, but back then, I was a little more hot-headed than I am now. Dodging cans, I made my way up and popped around the corner and then yelled, "Hey, asshat! What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The guy stopped for a minute, not even looking at me, but staring straight up at the ceiling. He then started screaming again, and still looking upwards, he put his arm straight out and started running in my direction, like some kind of deranged zombie or mummy. I beat feet back for the office and locked myself inside. This dude then started throwing himself against the door, over and over again. I picked up the phone in the manager's office and called the police. I waited there as the thumps of him banging himself against the door continued until I thought it would come off its hinges. Then the sound got distinctly different. This psychopath stopped throwing his body against the door and started ramming his head into it. And eventually, he went quiet. A few minutes later, I heard a police officer on the other side of the door. The little hallway back to the manager's office was coated in blood. This guy kept ramming his head over and over again into the door, and every time he swung his head backwards, blood would go everywhere. The officers did their best to cover him with a jacket, but I could see part of his head. The entire thing was pretty much caved in. I don't know what this dude was about, or what meds he was supposed to be taking that he wasn't, but all I know is I never worked another night shift after that. Screw the extra 50 cents an hour. I wanted to be there at the crack of dawn to see the misery in the eyes of the office workers versus the crazy in the eyes of that particular individual. So I managed to snag myself a temp job as a security guard. I was walking around with the other security guard. We'll just call him Zach for the sake of this story. Zach was filling me in on the ins and outs of the building and what I would need to do on a nightly patrol. He did give me some strong advice, though. He said, don't open the back door. There's actually some homeless folks that live around the dumpster in the back. For some context, the company we were working at was an old food processing plant, and they would raid the dumpster pretty much constantly, is what Zach would tell me. Apparently, somebody on the last shift had left the back door unlocked, unbeknownst to both Zach and I. So as I'm doing my rounds, I suddenly hear Zach go, "Hey," and then I hear Zach scream. And I mean scream like his life depended on it. Now, I may be a big dude, but I'm not a fighter by any means necessary. Most of the time, I'm just there to intimidate, but never really act on anything. But I went thundering across that warehouse. I saw Zach getting pummeled by two guys in ratty-looking clothes. So, I just kept up the run. The first guy whipped around just in enough time for me to clothesline him. He went flying and laid in a heap on the floor. The second guy turned around and reached into his pocket and pulled a blade. As he was pulling the blade out, I simply just took a nice swing and hit him right in the jaw. I actually felt something crack as the dude fell to the floor, and as soon as he did, I stepped down on his hand with the knife in it hard. I'm pretty sure I broke his jaw, because as he tried to open his mouth to scream, nothing came out but a muffled cry. As I kept my foot on him, I looked over at Zach, and he was out cold. So I picked up my phone and called the police. The police arrived fairly quickly. They apprehended one man that was just unconscious, took the other to the hospital that I had messed up his jaw, along with Zach. Zach was actually in the hospital for a couple of days. Apparently they did a number on him, a cracked rib, and even some damage to his neck. I'm happy to say that Zach's doing just fine and actually has another occupation, along with myself. I decided that hanging out in bars with a bunch of drunks was a lot better than guarding buildings from deranged homeless folks. Back when I was 20, I had a friend of mine who was a big stoner. But whatever it was and wherever it came from, it was definitely good. So one night he asked me if I can take his shift on the drive-thru, as he wasn't feeling well. I said sure and positioned myself to do just that. About 11 o'clock, a man with a very thick Hispanic accent comes to the drive-thru, places his order, and pulls around. As I look up to take the man's money, I notice it's a blue Chevy passenger van, and the man behind the wheel is wearing a mask. He says something in Spanish and pulls out a gun. Before I'm able to get away from the window, I heard 3 loud pops and felt the most intense pain I've ever felt in my life. And then, nothing. I just completely blacked out. The next thing I remember, I woke up in the hospital. It had been 3 days. My mother was sitting by my bedside and she was elated to see that I had actually woken up. Over time, she started filling in the details. Apparently the guy's name that had shot me was Hector. Hector was the one selling my buddy weed. And apparently my buddy had been stiffing Hector for a lot of money. So Hector came to collect. And my friend put me in the crossfire. After the guy had left the drive-thru, he quickly realized that I wasn't the person he was after. And after getting in a brief chase with the police, he wrecked his van. Oh, and as for my former friend, he's currently serving a 10-year jail sentence for his involvement. Well, dear patients, there you have it. 3 scary stories from the night shift. I hope you enjoyed it and thank you for listening. Like I always say in closing, check under your bed, look in your closet, and sleep with the light on. The life you save may very well be your own. Good night, everyone.